He was doling his sentences out with cautious slowness, balancing himself between word and intonation to hit the right degree of semi-clarity. He wanted her to understand, but he did not want her to understand fully, explicitly, down to the root, since the essence of that modern language, which he had learned to speak expertly, was never to let oneself or others understand anything down to the root. Atlas shrugged. Today this is the dominant method of communication in public speaking and writing, particularly on the subject of politics. A recent editorial in the New York Times is a valuable specimen of that method, an unusually clear example of the art of unclarity. The 4th of July is a good time to remind ourselves that there is urgent necessity for the nation's intellectual and political leaders to provide moral guidance at a time when so many people feel that the nation has lost its way, said the Times, concluding an editorial on July 4, 1972. This statement is incontrovertibly true, and one would be tempted to say, Amen. But the rest of the editorial is a remarkable example of the reasons why the nation has lost its way, though not in the sense the editorial intended. The most important issue confronting us today, the editorial declares, is how to prevent powerful special interests from frustrating the democratic process. No definitions are given, but the context suggests that special interests means pressure groups. This is not exactly a fundamental issue, but this is what the editorial regards as an urgent problem. To solve a problem, one must identify and correct or eliminate its causes. Therefore, one would expect the editorial writer to mention what caused the emergence of pressure groups, but he does not. He treats the subject as if pressure groups were facts of nature or irreducible primaries. That issue is so difficult to solve because all the clear, simple extremes are unworkable. Given modern industrial technologies, this country cannot go back to the highly atomistic competitive model of the early 19th century, even if it were willing to accept the workings of the marketplace as the arbiter of all social values and outcomes. But the experience of totalitarian and democratic societies alike suggests that mere substitution of the power of big government for that of big business and the marketplace is no solution. If a euphemism is an inoffensive way of identifying an offensive fact, then highly atomistic competitive model is an anti-euphemism, i.e., an offensive way of identifying an inoffensive or great and noble fact, in this case, capitalism. Competitive is a definition by non-essentials. Atomistic is worse. Capitalism involves competition as one of its proper consequences, not as its essential or defining attribute. Atomistic is usually intended to imply scattered, broken up, disintegrated. Capitalism is the system that made productive cooperation possible among men on a large scale, a voluntary cooperation that raised everyone's standard of living, as the 19th century has demonstrated. So atomistic is an anti-euphemism, standing for free, independent, individualistic. If the editorial's sentence were intended to be fully understood, it would read, "This country cannot go back to the free, individualistic, private property system of capitalism." Now, why would modern industrial technologies make a return to capitalism impossible? No answer is given. The clause, even if it, this country, were willing to accept the workings of the marketplace as the arbiter of all social values and outcomes, is an attack on a straw man. No advocate of capitalism ever held the workings of the marketplace as the arbiter of all social values and outcomes, only of the economic ones, i.e., those pertaining to production and trade. In a free marketplace, these values and outcomes are determined by a free, general, democratic vote, by the sales, purchases, and choices of every individual. And, as one indication of the fact that under capitalism there are social values outside the power of the marketplace, each individual votes only on those matters which he is qualified to judge, on his own preferences, interests, and needs. The paramount social value he has no power to encroach upon is the rights of others. He cannot substitute his vote and judgment for theirs. He cannot declare himself to be the voice of the people and leave the people disenfranchised. Is this what our country would be unwilling to accept? The last sentence of the quoted paragraph resorts to the shabby old gimmick of equating opposites by substituting non-essentials for their essential characteristics. In this case, the defacing acid, obliterating differences, is the attribute of bigness. If a reader is to be made to feel that businessmen and dictators are interchangeably equal villains, he must be pushed to forget that a big, productive genius, e.g. Henry Ford Sr., and a big killer, e.g. Stalin, are not the same thing, and that the difference between a totalitarian and a free society does not consist in substituting Stalin for Henry Ford Sr. When the baser kind of politician resorts to that gimmick, he is counting on the ugliest emotion of lesser people, envy, and if they confuse bigness with greatness, it serves his purpose. But why would a reputable newspaper do it? The editorial's next paragraph gives a clue to the answer. The crucial task facing the United States and other democratic societies is to find workable answers between the extremes, to limit concentrations of corporate power without undermining the efficiency of business, to permit the market to allocate resources insofar as possible, but also to use adequate resources to achieve socially desirable purposes in response to the democratically exercised choices of the society. Who is to permit the market to allocate resources? Whose resources? What are socially desirable purposes? Who desires them, and at whose expense? Since the fundamental factor, resource of production, is human intelligence, is it to be disposed of by the choices of the society? No explicit answers are given, but observe the workings of the unnamed in the above quotation. The two extremes are capitalism, i.e. freedom, and totalitarianism, i.e. dictatorship. The workable answers are to be sought in the middle, in a combination of these two. Observe the method suggested. Business efficiency must not be undermined, which is an implicit admission that this efficiency depends on freedom, but government must control the development and limit the growth of business. The market must be kept free, insofar as possible, but if society desires some particular purpose, freedom becomes impossible. Which of the two extremes is violated, and which is given priority in this suggested method? So it turns out that the editorial writer is advocating the very thing which he falsely ascribed to capitalism. He is suggesting that the marketplace should be made the arbiter of all social values and outcomes, not, however, the clean economic marketplace, but the corrupt political one. An intrusion of political power is corrupt and corrupting, since it introduces an opportunity for legalized looting. He is using the word democratic in its original meaning, unlimited majority rule, and he is urging us to accept a social system in which one's work, one's property, one's mind, and one's life are at the mercy of any gang that may muster the vote of a majority at any moment for any purpose. If this is a society's system, no power on earth can prevent men from ganging up on one another in self-defense, forming pressure groups. If you look past the modern verbiage, you will find, smuggled between the lines, the thing which the editorial writer wants you to understand, but not to understand fully, explicitly down to the root: altruism. It is not any practical considerations, not modern industrial technologies, or the workings of the marketplace, or economics, or politics, or reality that make it impossible for us to return to capitalism, to freedom, progress, abundance. It is the altruist moral code, which the editorial is struggling to preserve in the form of socially desirable purposes that supersede individual rights. The workable answer it exhorts us to seek is how to combine capitalism with the creed of self-sacrifice. It is futile to bemoan this country's moral decadence or blame politicians for the credibility gap if this is the kind of guidance the nation is given by its intellectual leaders. Politicians are not the cause of a culture's trend, only its consequence. They get their notions from the cultural atmosphere, particularly from newspapers, magazines, and TV commentaries. They speak as these media teach them to speak. Who teaches the media? And now we come down to the root. Of all our institutions, it is the universities that are primarily responsible for this country losing its way.